The world has always admired Catherine, the Princess of Wales, for her calm grace and almost unshakable composure. Whether she is walking the red carpet in front of flashing cameras or stooping down to speak kindly to a child during royal engagements, she has cultivated an image of perfect elegance. But behind the palace gates, a very different Catherine emerged, a mother pushed to her limits, her mask of composure cracking as she came face to face with an unthinkable betrayal. It all began quietly, as most royal scandals do. The coronation of King Charles III was meant to be a flawless, historic event that unified a country and silenced critics. Yet, in the days leading up to the grand ceremony, rehearsals inside Westminster Abbey turned chaotic. Amidst the swirling robes and frantic preparations, an incident occurred that no one expected. The royal family's CCTV cameras, usually there for security, captured something explosive. Queen Camilla, in a moment of irritation, appeared to scold Princess Charlotte harshly and, according to palace whispers, grabbed the young girl's arm with more force than necessary. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. At first, the footage was only discussed in hushed tones among senior aides. A few of them, loyal to the Queen consort, insisted it was nothing more than a stern grandmotherly correction. But others, especially those close to Catherine, felt a deep unease. One aide reportedly said, "You could see the look on Charlotte's face. It wasn't just surprise. It was fear." The moment was brief, but the cameras caught every detail. Hours later, the footage disappeared. Not a trace of it could be found in the palace archives. Yet, in the age of technology, nothing ever truly vanishes. A brave staff member, disturbed by what they saw and the speed of the cover-up, took a screenshot before the video was deleted and quietly passed it on to a trusted friend outside the palace walls. The image quickly began circulating among a handful of journalists who sensed its explosive potential. But strangely, before any of them could publish it, they were contacted by palace lawyers and pressured into silence. One journalist later admitted off the record, "It felt like I was staring at a powder keg. If we ran the story, it could have destroyed relationships at the very top." When Catherine was informed of what happened, her reaction stunned those closest to her. Known for her diplomacy and habit of resolving conflicts discreetly, Catherine reportedly became incandescent with rage. Insiders claim she stormed into a private meeting with senior palace advisors, slamming her hand on the table and demanding answers. She wasn't speaking as a princess anymore. She was speaking as a mother. "This isn't about optics. This isn't about protecting the institution," she allegedly said. "This is about my child. If you don't handle this properly, I will." What Catherine meant by "handle this properly" remains unclear. But the aides who heard her tone believed she was willing to take drastic measures, including releasing the full CCTV footage herself. For a woman who has spent years carefully building a reputation as the royal family's peacemaker, this was unprecedented. Catherine had drawn a line in the sand. Meanwhile, King Charles was said to be torn and deeply distressed by the situation. The Queen consort defended her actions privately, calling them a misunderstood attempt at discipline. She reportedly told a friend, "I was trying to keep her in line during an important rehearsal. It wasn't my intention to upset anyone." But Catherine didn't see it that way. To her, this wasn't a grandmother's gentle scolding. It was a betrayal, a moment that could scar her daughter for life. As rumors swirled and palace PR teams scrambled, social media began buzzing with fragments of the story. A blurry, cropped version of the leaked screenshot surfaced briefly on Twitter before disappearing as quickly as it appeared. But the damage was done. Questions erupted online. What happened to Princess Charlotte? Why is the palace covering this up? For Catherine, this was no longer just a private family matter. It was a test of loyalty, power, and motherhood in a world where even the highest-ranking royals could not escape scrutiny. Was this the moment that would break the royal family apart? Or would the palace succeed in burying the truth forever? Stay with us as we take you behind the walls of Buckingham Palace, into the heart of a story that may forever change how we see the royals, and reveal what happens when a mother refuses to stay silent. The grandeur of the British monarchy has always been its greatest strength and its most fragile weakness. For centuries, the royal family has projected an image of unity, resilience, and grace under pressure. But as the coronation of King Charles III approached, cracks in that carefully cultivated facade began to widen. Behind the palace walls, tension was building like a storm gathering strength, ready to sweep through the corridors of power and expose everything the royals had worked so hard to conceal. The coronation was meant to be the crowning moment of Charles's life, literally and symbolically. After decades as the Prince of Wales, he was finally stepping into the role he had been preparing for since birth. The whole world would be watching as he and Camilla ascended to the throne together, the ultimate symbol of a modernized monarchy. Yet beneath the pomp and pageantry, there was a different story unfolding. Camilla, now queen consort, was struggling to command the same universal respect as her late predecessor, Queen Elizabeth II. Some in the palace whispered that her temperament didn't always fit the image of a loving matriarch. Staff members spoke quietly of her sharp tongue and unforgiving demeanor, traits that had surfaced more often in the stressful days leading up to the ceremony. "She's under immense pressure," one long-serving courtier confided to a reporter. "But sometimes the way she channels that pressure can make people uncomfortable. She doesn't suffer fools gladly, and in this environment, that can create friction." Friction was indeed in the air. William and Catherine, who had long maintained a cordial but cautious relationship with Camilla, sensed that her increasing authority was unsettling the delicate family balance. For years, they had worked hard to shield their 3 children from the harsher realities of royal life, determined to give George, Charlotte, and Louis as normal a childhood as possible. But now, during the coronation rehearsals, their efforts were being tested like never before. On the day of the rehearsal at Westminster Abbey, the atmosphere was frenetic. Staff scurried about, adjusting floral arrangements, perfecting seating charts, and timing processions to the second. Aides clutched clipboards, their faces tight with anxiety as they tried to keep everything on schedule. Amid this chaos, the younger royals were brought in to practice their roles. Princess Charlotte, just 8 years old, stood slightly apart from her brothers. Dressed in a simple navy coat and patent leather shoes, she watched the rehearsals with wide, curious eyes. Unlike George, who had already been groomed for leadership as a future king, Charlotte was still allowed moments of childish innocence. Yet even she could feel the weight of expectation pressing down in that vast, echoing abbey. Camilla noticed Charlotte fidgeting as an aide adjusted her sash. Perhaps the queen consort was trying to help. Perhaps she was frustrated by the delays. Whatever her intentions, what happened next became the seed of an explosive scandal. She walked up to Charlotte and said something sharply, an eyewitness later recalled. "We couldn't hear the exact words, but her tone was unmistakable, harsh and scolding." Then she reached out and grabbed Charlotte's arm to reposition her. It wasn't a gentle touch. The little girl flinched. Those watching froze, unsure how to react. No one dared intervene, not the aides, not the security guards stationed discreetly around the abbey. For a moment, silence hung in the air, broken only by the shuffling of feet as the rehearsal resumed. But someone had seen everything. The abbey was under constant surveillance, with CCTV cameras recording every corner for security purposes. And this particular camera, trained on the aisle where Charlotte stood, captured the entire incident in chilling clarity. Within hours, the footage was reviewed by palace security. Normally, such recordings were archived without fanfare. But this time, something strange happened. The segment involving Camilla and Charlotte was flagged and swiftly removed from the system. "It was like it vanished into thin air," said a palace insider. "One moment it was there, and the next it was gone. Officially, we were told it had been deleted for privacy reasons. But we all knew that wasn't the whole truth." This act of erasure only deepened the unease among staff. To some, it was a routine attempt to protect the queen consort's reputation. To others, it was a chilling reminder of how far the palace would go to preserve its perfect image, even at the expense of the truth. Catherine found out about the incident later that evening. At first, she didn't believe it. Charlotte had said nothing when she was picked up from the rehearsal, behaving as her usual sweet self. But when a trusted aide pulled her aside and explained what had happened, how Camilla had lost her temper and how the footage had been wiped from the system, something inside Catherine snapped. She was furious, said a friend of the princess. Not just upset, furious in a way none of us had ever seen before. She kept asking, "Why didn't anyone stop it? Why didn't anyone tell me sooner? William tried to calm her, suggesting they approach the matter privately. But Catherine, usually the voice of reason in their marriage, wasn't interested in diplomacy this time. She felt betrayed. The friend continued. This wasn't just about palace politics anymore. This was about her daughter. Over the next few days, the tension between Catherine and Camilla simmered beneath the surface. During public appearances, both women smiled and waved as if nothing had happened. But behind closed doors, Catherine made her position clear. Either the palace addressed the incident, or she would find a way to bring it into the open herself. For a family that thrives on secrecy and careful image management, Catherine's ultimatum was a terrifying prospect. Little did anyone know, a single screenshot was about to ignite a firestorm no one in the royal family could control. The grandeur of Westminster Abbey had never seemed so overwhelming. Its towering stone arches and centuries-old stained glass windows stood as silent witnesses to 1,000 royal ceremonies. On this particular day, however, the Abbey was not filled with the hushed reverence of prayer or the solemnity of a coronation. It was filled with a palpable tension that seemed to crackle in the air like static. This was no ordinary rehearsal. With only days left before the coronation of King Charles III, every detail had to be perfect. Timing was everything, from the procession of the royals to the precise movements of attendants carrying sacred regalia. The atmosphere was one of quiet panic as senior aides darted across the stone floors, clipboards in hand, whispering instructions to footmen and clergy alike. For the senior members of the royal family, this was just another duty, a chance to practice their steps and speeches. But for the younger generation, it was an entirely different world. Princess Charlotte, only 8 years old, looked around the cavernous space with wide eyes. The echoing footsteps and solemn faces gave her little comfort. She had been here before, of course, but this time felt heavier, more serious. She was dressed immaculately in a navy blue coat, her hair neatly parted and tied back with a ribbon. Though she tried to stand still and listen to the instructions, her small hands fidgeted with the edge of her sleeve. At that moment, she didn't look like a princess rehearsing for a historic event. She looked like a little girl who wanted nothing more than to be at home, curled up on the sofa beside her mother. Camilla, Queen Consort, stood nearby, her own expression tight with focus. The weight of her new role was written across her face. After decades of being criticized and scrutinized by the public, she had fought her way to this moment. And now, as she prepared to stand beside her husband as his queen, she felt the need to ensure everything was in order, even the behavior of her step-grandchildren. It was during a pause in the rehearsal that the incident unfolded. Charlotte had been asked to step forward and rehearse her role in the family's processional order. But something seemed to distract her, a loose strand of ribbon perhaps, or the overwhelming echo of voices in the Abbey. Whatever it was, she didn't move fast enough to satisfy Camilla. An aide later recalled the scene vividly. Camilla walked over briskly, her heels clicking against the stone floor. Her voice was low at first, but her words carried a sharpness that made everyone nearby stop and glance up. She leaned down and spoke directly to Charlotte, and then she reached out and grabbed her arm. The grab wasn't violent, but it wasn't gentle either. Charlotte startled, her eyes darting to the ground as though she were trying to shrink into herself. A few of the staff stiffened, unsure whether they should step in. But no one moved. Perhaps it would have ended there, a momentary lapse in Camilla's composure, quickly forgotten. But the entire exchange played out in front of one of the Abbey's CCTV cameras. The camera, mounted high on a stone column, had been installed for security reasons. Its unblinking eye watched silently as Camilla released Charlotte's arm and straightened up, adjusting her coat as if nothing had happened. The little girl stood still, shoulders tense, as the rehearsal resumed. Later that afternoon, the CCTV footage was reviewed as part of the routine security checks. That's when a palace staffer noticed the incident. He wasn't someone with influence or power, just a young technician tasked with monitoring hours of recordings. But as he watched Camilla's hand grasp Charlotte's arm and saw the child's subtle flinch, he felt a sinking sensation in his chest. Something about the moment felt wrong. It wasn't just the grab, the technician later confided to a friend. It was the look on Charlotte's face. You could see she wasn't expecting it. She was scared. He didn't know what to do. Reporting it up the chain could mean trouble for him. Keeping silent felt equally wrong. So, he made a fateful decision. He paused the footage and took a screenshot. Just one still image. Camilla's hand on Charlotte's arm, the queen consort's face caught mid-scold, and Charlotte's small body stiff with tension. Hours later, when he checked the system again, the segment of footage was gone. Deleted for privacy reasons. His supervisor explained curtly. You don't need to ask questions about this sort of thing. Just focus on your work. But the image haunted him. Meanwhile, Catherine had no idea what had transpired. She was busy attending a planning meeting with palace aides, discussing the family's travel arrangements for the coronation day. Charlotte had said nothing about the rehearsal when she came home that evening, and there was no visible sign of distress. But Charlotte was a sensitive child, keenly aware of the expectations placed on her. Perhaps she didn't want to upset her mother. Perhaps she didn't know how to put her feelings into words. For Camilla, the incident may have felt like nothing more than a fleeting loss of patience. A grandmother trying to guide a child in the midst of chaos. But for those who had witnessed it, there was an undeniable sense that a line had been crossed. As the rehearsal ended and the royals filed out of the abbey, no one spoke of the moment openly. But in hushed tones behind closed doors, the whispers began. Did you see how Camilla grabbed Charlotte? Do you think Catherine knows? Will this come back to haunt us? In the coming days, those whispers would grow louder. The staff member's screenshot, kept secret for now, would soon find its way outside the palace walls. And once Catherine discovered the truth, nothing would ever be the same again. This wasn't just another rehearsal. It was the spark that lit the fuse on a scandal set to explode. The next morning, Buckingham Palace hummed with its usual mechanical efficiency. Staffers in crisp uniforms moved through the halls like clockwork, tending to flowers, polishing silver, and preparing briefing papers for the senior royals. On the surface, it was business as usual. But underneath the polished veneer, tension coiled like a snake ready to strike. In the small, windowless security office deep within the palace, the night shift was wrapping up. Screens lined the walls, displaying live feeds from cameras placed across the royal estates. Here, nothing went unnoticed. Not the smallest flicker of movement in the royal gardens, nor the approach of a delivery van at the staff entrance. But there was one piece of footage that was causing more anxiety than any stranger at the gates. The segment from Westminster Abbey had made its way to this control room overnight as part of routine data transfers. Normally, rehearsals like these were recorded only as a precaution against security threats. After review, they were archived and forgotten. But this particular recording wasn't destined for the archives. By dawn, a group of senior security staff had already viewed the footage. It showed Queen Camilla leaning down toward Princess Charlotte, speaking in a tone sharp enough to make the young girl flinch. Then came the moment no one wanted to acknowledge. The queen consort's hand closing around Charlotte's small arm, tugging her slightly before letting go. It doesn't look good, one of the men said, shaking his head. No, replied another. It looks like trouble. And if the press gets hold of this, it will be chaos. They weren't wrong. Word of the incident had already reached one of Charles's most senior advisors, who stormed into the security room with a face like thunder. Delete it, he ordered, his voice low but seething with authority. We don't need another scandal right now. But sir, a technician began cautiously. There are protocols. Forget protocols, the advisor snapped. This is family business. If this leaks, it won't just harm Her Majesty. It will harm the institution itself. The public is looking for unity, not family infighting. The command was clear. Erase the segment, and do it fast. Within minutes, the footage was wiped from the system. Backups were purged. It was as if the incident had never happened. Or so they thought. What the advisor didn't know was that one junior technician had already acted on instinct. Haunted by the image of Charlotte's frightened face, he had discreetly copied a still frame from the recording and sent it to his personal email before the deletion order came down. He hadn't planned to leak it. Not at first. But as he watched the cover-up unfold in real time, guilt gnawed at him. This isn't right, he murmured to himself in the privacy of his small London flat later that night. They're acting like nothing happened. But something did. The technician wasn't alone in his unease. Elsewhere in the palace, murmurs about the erased footage began to circulate among staff members. In the kitchens, in the laundry rooms, in the corridors where footmen and ladies-in-waiting crossed paths, The same whispered question echoed. Did you hear about the rehearsal? Did you hear what Camilla did? Is it true? Someone asked in a hushed voice. They say there was footage, another replied. But it's gone now. Wiped clean. For those who had served in the royal household long enough, this wasn't surprising. The palace had a long history of protecting its own, burying stories before they could take root, silencing voices that threatened to disrupt the carefully crafted image of stability and grace. But in the digital age, secrets were harder to contain. 2 days later, the technician's screenshot quietly landed in the inbox of a freelance journalist who had covered the royal family for years. The email had no subject line, no message, just an attachment. A single frame showing Camilla's hand on Charlotte's arm, her face twisted in mid-scold. The journalist stared at the image for a long time, her heart pounding. She knew immediately what it meant. If this was real, and her gut told her it was, this was dynamite. The kind of thing that could blow a hole through the monarchy's pristine image. But before she could even begin drafting her story, her phone rang. It was a palace lawyer. We're aware of an image circulating that purports to show Her Majesty the Queen Consort and Princess Charlotte. The voice on the other end said coolly. Publishing such material would be highly irresponsible and a gross invasion of privacy. We advise you to tread very carefully. The threat was implicit and effective. Within hours, the journalist decided against running the story. Others who had seen the screenshot, editors, bloggers, even royal commentators, also backed down under quiet but firm pressure from palace representatives. For a brief moment, it seemed the cover-up had worked. But then Catherine found out. It wasn't through official channels. No one in the palace had dared to tell her about the rehearsal incident directly. Instead, it was a loyal aide, someone who had served her since her days as Duchess of Cambridge, who broke the news. The aide chose her words carefully, but the moment she showed Catherine the screenshot, there was no containing the storm. She stared at it for a long time, the aide later recalled. Her hands were shaking. And then she said, they erased it. They erased everything. For Catherine, it wasn't just the act itself, it was the betrayal. The idea that something had happened to her daughter, and the palace, the institution she had devoted her adult life to supporting, had tried to sweep it under the rug. Her reaction was swift and uncharacteristically fierce. She was livid, said a family friend. She told William, this isn't just about me anymore. This is about Charlotte. If they won't protect her, I will. Catherine's anger sent shockwaves through the palace. This was the woman who had always been the calm in the royal storm, the peacemaker between warring factions. But now, she was prepared to go to war herself. And somewhere, in the shadows of the internet, the screenshot continued to linger. It was only a matter of time before it would resurface. The morning the screenshot leaked, London woke to an unusual silence. It was one of those rare days when the British tabloids didn't scream their headlines in oversized fonts. One of those moments before the roar of a scandal when the air itself felt heavy. It started quietly, as scandals often do, not with a front-page splash or a breaking news alert, but with a single post on an obscure social media account. At first, hardly anyone noticed. A grainy image appeared on Twitter, accompanied by a cryptic caption, "What really happens behind palace walls?" #Royal Secrets, #Princess Charlotte. The image was cropped tightly, but what it showed was unmistakable. Camilla, her hand gripping Charlotte's small arm as the young princess stared at the ground, her face stiff with tension. Even though the screenshot was blurry, the emotional weight in the frame was undeniable. It didn't matter that there was no context. It didn't matter that no one could verify if it was real. The damage had already begun. Within minutes, the post had been shared hundreds of times. A few users dismissed it as a fake, a cruel attempt to smear the Queen Consort. But others weren't so sure. Look at Charlotte's body language, one commenter wrote. She's recoiling. You can't fake that. Palace is going to bury this faster than Diana's tapes, said another. The post was quickly taken down, an unmistakable sign that lawyers had intervened, but by then it was too late. Screenshots had already been saved and reposted across platforms. Instagram pages dedicated to royal gossip picked it up. TikTok users began analyzing the image and videos, some going frame by frame, pointing out Charlotte's expression, Camilla's grip, the setting. In less than 3 hours, the hashtag #ProtectCharlotte was trending globally. Inside Buckingham Palace, panic erupted. The communications team had been preparing for potential hiccups around the coronation, protesters, critics of Camilla's ascension, even rogue family members. But they had not prepared for this. A viral image that cast the queen consort as a bully and the monarchy itself as complicit in hiding her actions. Phone lines buzzed. Emails flew back and forth with subject lines like urgent, Charlotte photo, and crisis comms plan. Advisors huddled in private rooms, debating the best course of action. Some argued for denial. We say the image is doctored. That's the easiest way to kill it. Others warned against that approach. If it's proven real later, we'll look even worse. We need to get ahead of this. Meanwhile, Catherine was watching the storm unfold from Kensington Palace. She had been up since dawn, pacing the drawing room as she refreshed her phone screen again and again. Let them try to bury it now, she said bitterly to a close aide. William, sitting nearby, looked exhausted. He had spent most of the night on the phone with his father, trying to mediate between Catherine and the rest of the family. Kate, we need to think carefully about our next move, he said cautiously. But Catherine was in no mood for diplomacy. This isn't politics, William. This is our daughter. She's 8 years old, and they're treating her like collateral damage. Her voice cracked slightly on the last words, and for a moment, her anger gave way to raw pain. The queen consort, for her part, had gone silent. Behind the palace walls, Camilla reportedly spent the morning in her private quarters, refusing to take calls from even her closest advisors. She had been preparing for the greatest public triumph of her life, being crowned beside Charles in front of millions. But now, whispers of her behavior threatened to overshadow everything. This will blow over, Charles told her gently, resting a hand on hers. It always does. But Camilla wasn't convinced. As the hours passed, pressure mounted for the palace to issue a statement. By mid-afternoon, they released a brief, carefully worded response. The royal family does not comment on private moments, particularly those involving children. We ask the public and media to respect the privacy of Princess Charlotte. It was a non-denial that satisfied no one. The statement only fueled speculation. So they're not saying it's fake? One royal commentator asked during a live broadcast. That silence speaks volumes. Parenting experts began weighing in. Television panels debated whether Camilla had crossed a line. Even celebrities entered the fray, with one British actress tweeting, "Hands off the kids." End of discussion. For Catherine, the palace's tepid response felt like betrayal layered upon betrayal. She expected them to protect Charlotte, a friend confided later. But instead, they chose to protect Camilla. That's when Kate decided she was done playing nice. That evening, in a private meeting with 2 senior advisors and her husband, Catherine issued an ultimatum. Release the full footage, she demanded, her voice calm but icy. Let the public see what really happened, or I'll do it myself. The room fell silent. One advisor cleared his throat nervously. Your Royal Highness, with respect, you must understand how damaging this would be, not just to Her Majesty, but to the monarchy as a whole. Catherine's eyes didn't waver. If protecting my daughter means damaging the monarchy, so be it. William rubbed his temples, torn between his loyalty to the crown and his wife's fierce maternal instinct. Kate, he began, but she cut him off. I've been silent long enough, she said. I've watched this family cover for each other, time and again. But not this time. Not when it's Charlotte. The threat hung heavy in the air. Everyone in the room understood the implications. If Catherine leaked the video herself, it would be a declaration of war inside the royal family, one that could tear the institution apart. But in that moment, Catherine didn't care about protocol or tradition. She cared about one thing only, her child. And as the screenshot continued to spread like wildfire online, it became clear that the world was watching. The next morning, Kensington Palace felt different. The usual tranquility of its halls had been replaced with a restless energy, as though every servant and aide could sense the storm gathering just beyond the tall iron gates. For Catherine, the Princess of Wales, it wasn't just another day in the royal calendar. It was the day she resolved to break centuries of silence and deference. The night before had been sleepless. Catherine had stood at her bedroom window for hours, staring out over the palace gardens, her mind replaying the image of Camilla's hand gripping Charlotte's arm again and again. She couldn't stop imagining her daughter's small face, the flicker of fear in her eyes. She was just a little girl, Catherine whispered to herself, her voice breaking. At dawn, she made her decision. By mid-morning, Catherine was seated in her private study, surrounded by her closest advisors and William. But this was no ordinary family meeting. This was a war council. She's serious this time, one aide murmured as Catherine fixed her gaze on the men and women gathered before her. I want the full footage released, she said firmly. I want the public to see the truth. No editing. No spin. Just the unvarnished reality. An older advisor shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Your Royal Highness, with respect, releasing that footage would cause irreparable harm, not just to Her Majesty the Queen Consort, but to the entire monarchy. Catherine's jaw tightened. Do you think I care about that right now? My daughter was manhandled, and instead of protecting her, this institution chose to bury it. William, sitting beside her, rubbed his temples. He had been trying all night to calm her down, to reason with her, but he could see now that there would be no changing her mind. Kate, please, he said softly. I understand how you feel, but this isn't just about Charlotte anymore. If you go public, it will split the family. It will damage the crown in ways we can't fix. She turned to him, her voice steady but her eyes blazing. And what about Charlotte? What about the damage done to her? Or does she not matter because she's not the heir? The words cut deep, and for a moment, William had no reply. One of Catherine's younger advisors spoke up cautiously. Perhaps there's a middle ground. We could issue a stronger statement acknowledging the incident and emphasizing the princess's well-being. It wouldn't be the full footage, but it might satisfy public concern. Catherine shook her head. No, that's not enough. They've already tried to bury this once. I won't let them twist the narrative again. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a near whisper. If the palace refuses to release the footage, I will. And believe me, I'll make sure it reaches every news outlet in the world. Gasps rippled around the table. This was not the Catherine they were used to, the composed, diplomatic princess who had spent years quietly smoothing over family tensions. This was Catherine as a mother, fierce and unyielding. Your Royal Highness, an advisor said nervously. If you do this, the Queen Consort will never forgive you. His Majesty may not either. It could lead to a permanent rift. Catherine's response was icy. Then let there be a rift. As the meeting broke up, word of Catherine's ultimatum spread quickly through palace circles. Senior aides rushed to brief King Charles and Queen Camilla, their faces pale with worry. She's serious, one whispered. She's ready to go nuclear. At Clarence's house, Charles was distraught. He had spent his entire life preparing to uphold the stability of the monarchy. Now, on the eve of his coronation, the family's unity was crumbling before his eyes. She wouldn't really do it, he said, more as a plea than a statement. But Camilla wasn't so sure. She's her mother, Camilla said sharply. You saw her face at Christmas when Charlotte slipped on the ice. She nearly went mad with worry. Of course she'll do it. Camilla's own anger was simmering just below the surface. She felt unfairly vilified, painted as a villain in a narrative she believed had been blown out of proportion. I was firm with the child, she told Charles. But I wasn't cruel. Catherine's making it sound like I slapped her across the face. Charles sighed heavily. Perception is reality, my dear. And right now, the perception is against you. Meanwhile, outside the palace walls, public outrage continued to grow. Parenting groups issued statements condemning the palace's silence. Newspapers ran editorials demanding transparency. Even normally loyal royal commentators began to question whether the institution was protecting the wrong person. For Catherine, there was no turning back. She felt like she'd been left with no choice, said a family friend. She kept saying, if they think I'll let them sacrifice my daughter to protect Camilla, they've underestimated me. By the end of the day, Catherine drafted a private letter to the palace's head of communications. It was direct and uncompromising. As Princess of Wales and mother to Princess Charlotte, I demand the immediate release of the unedited security footage from Westminster Abbey. If this request is not fulfilled within 72 hours, I will release it myself. The letter was hand-delivered, its arrival sending a fresh wave of panic through Buckingham Palace. This is unprecedented, muttered one senior aide. We've never had a royal threaten to leak internal security footage. Not even Diana went this far. But Catherine wasn't Diana. She wasn't seeking revenge or waging a media war for personal gain. She was fighting for her child. And for the first time in her royal life, Catherine felt no fear of the consequences. The corridors of Clarence's house were unusually quiet. Even the staff, normally brisk and chatty as they passed through, spoke in hushed tones now. It was as though everyone feared their words would echo too loudly, traveling to the ears of a queen consort whose temper was said to be simmering dangerously close to boiling point. In her private sitting room, Camilla sat rigidly upright on a plush armchair, a cup of tea untouched on the side table beside her. Her fingers drummed against the armrest as she stared at her reflection in the tall window. The woman looking back at her wasn't the warm, smiling queen the public had grown used to seeing over the past year. This woman's expression was hard, her eyes narrowed with the weight of anger and humiliation. "They're making me out to be a monster," she said flatly, breaking the silence. Across from her, Charles sat with his head bowed, hands clasped tightly together. He had been trying, and failing, to soothe his wife since Catherine's ultimatum arrived earlier that morning. "No one thinks you're a monster, darling," he murmured, his voice heavy with exhaustion. Camilla snapped her gaze to him. "Don't patronize me, Charles. You've read the headlines. You've seen the tweets. #protect Charlotte. Release the footage. They've already chosen their side, and it isn't mine." She rose abruptly and began pacing the room, her heels clicking sharply against the polished wood floor. "All I did was take charge. The rehearsal was chaos. The children weren't paying attention. Charlotte was fidgeting with her sash when she should have been standing still. I spoke firmly. I guided her arm so she'd focus. That's all." Charles said nothing. Camilla's voice grew sharper. "They're twisting it, Charles. Catherine is twisting it. She's making it sound like I grabbed the girl by the throat and shook her." "You know that isn't what's being said," Charles replied softly. But even as he spoke, he knew Camilla wasn't entirely wrong. The leaked screenshot had been enough to ignite a firestorm. Parenting experts on morning talk shows were already dissecting the image, some calling it a sign of emotional overreach, others suggesting it showed nothing more than a stern grandmotherly correction. The public, however, didn't seem interested in nuance. To them, it was a clear-cut case, a child's safety versus an institution's need for control. And Catherine, with her quiet elegance and reputation as a fiercely protective mother, had emerged as the perfect heroine in the unfolding drama. "Catherine is weaponizing this," Camilla said bitterly. "She knows how to play the public. She's making me the villain to prop up her image as the perfect mother." "She's hurt," Charles said gently. "She feels betrayed." Camilla whirled on him. "And what about me? Do I not have the right to defend myself? Do I just sit here and let her destroy everything I've worked for?" Her voice cracked slightly, and Charles's heart ached. He crossed the room and took her hands in his. "You're my wife. My queen. I will stand by you. But we must tread carefully. If this escalates further, the damage could be irreversible." Camilla pulled her hands away and resumed pacing. "The footage must remain hidden," she said firmly. "If it's released, the press will run it on repeat for weeks. Every look, every gesture will be analyzed to death. I won't survive it." At that very moment, in Buckingham Palace, senior aides were locked in heated discussions about how to manage the crisis. Some argued that Catherine's threat was a bluff, that she'd never risk harming the monarchy's reputation, no matter how angry she was. Others weren't so sure. "You've seen her lately," one advisor said grimly. "She's different. This isn't the same Kate we're used to. She's had enough." And then there were those who blamed Camilla outright. "She's abrasive," whispered a junior aide. "Always has been. Maybe this is her own doing." The divide wasn't just among staff. Within the family, lines were being drawn. Princess and, ever the pragmatic royal, reportedly sided with Camilla. "We don't air our dirty laundry," she told a confidant. "If Catherine can't handle that, perhaps she isn't cut out for this life." But Sophie, the Duchess of Edinburgh, was said to have quietly expressed sympathy for Catherine. "She's a mother," Sophie said. "What would any of us do if we thought our child was being mistreated?" Even Prince Harry and Meghan, thousands of miles away in California, couldn't resist weighing in. A source close to the Sussexes claimed Meghan had told friends, "This is exactly why we left. They'll protect the institution at any cost, even if it means sacrificing the innocent." As Camilla's defenders and critics clashed behind closed doors, the Queen Consort began crafting her own strategy. "She wanted to go on the offensive," said a senior palace insider. She felt she had been too passive up to this point. She told Charles, "If Catherine wants a fight, I'll give her one." Camilla's advisors drafted a statement that would portray her as a loving grandmother figure misunderstood in a moment of high stress. But Charles vetoed it at the last minute, fearing it would only inflame tensions. "No," he said firmly. "We must keep the family united. We will resolve this privately." But by now, it was becoming clear to everyone involved. Catherine had no intention of keeping this private. That evening, Camilla attended a small dinner for Commonwealth dignitaries. On the surface, she appeared calm and composed, smiling graciously as she accepted compliments and posed for photographs. But those who watched her closely noticed the tension in her jaw, the way her fingers gripped her clutch bag a little too tightly. She was putting on a brave face, one guest later said. But you could tell something was deeply wrong. As the dinner ended, Camilla retreated to her private car, her expression hardening the moment the cameras were gone. "They've underestimated me," she muttered under her breath. "They think I'll roll over. Well, they're about to see just how strong I can be." And so, as Catherine prepared for her next move and the world watched with bated breath, the royal family found itself hurtling toward a confrontation unlike any it had faced in decades. A clash not just between two women, but between tradition and change, silence and truth. It started as a flicker. A few concerned voices on social media, a handful of parenting blogs discussing the mystery screenshot, and then a short segment on a late-night talk show in America where the host cautiously asked, "Is something brewing in the House of Windsor?" By the next morning, it wasn't a flicker anymore. It was a wildfire. The hashtag Protect Charlotte had gone from trending on Twitter to dominating the headlines of major international news outlets. The Guardian ran a sober column titled, "A Palace in Crisis: What's Happening Behind Closed Doors?" While the Daily Mail, ever eager to stir the pot, plastered its front page with, "Charlotte caught in Palace Row. Was the Queen consort too harsh?" And then there was the clip. A short, pixelated video, only 3 seconds long, surfaced online. It showed Camilla leaning down toward Charlotte, her face animated and sharp, her hand reaching out. Though blurry, it was clear enough to show the little girl flinching as Camilla's fingers closed around her arm. The video exploded across platforms. In under an hour, it had been viewed over 10 million times on TikTok alone. Influencers and commentators dissected the footage frame by frame, their voices layered with outrage. "Look at her body language," said one viral video. "Charlotte isn't being mischievous, she's scared. And they tried to bury this." Another clip featured a tearful young mother who spoke directly to the camera. "As a mom, this breaks my heart. No one, not even a queen, has the right to treat a child this way." By midday, parents across Britain were speaking out. On playgrounds, in coffee shops, and on television panels, the conversation raged. Was Camilla too harsh? Was this just a moment taken out of context? Or was it symptomatic of a deeper problem in the royal family? In London's Hyde Park, a small group of mothers gathered with hand-painted signs reading, "Hands off Charlotte," and "Kids aren't props." The protest was modest, no more than 30 people, but the images went viral, plastered across social media feeds with captions like, "The palace can't silence us all." For Catherine, watching from Kensington Palace, it was a surreal experience. "She was overwhelmed," said a source close to her. She didn't expect this level of public support. She thought she'd be standing alone against the institution. But now she realized millions of people were standing with her. William, however, was torn. "This is spiraling out of control," he told Catherine late that night. "You've made your point. The public is behind you. But if this continues, there won't be any going back." Catherine shook her head. "They've had every chance to do the right thing. Instead, they've chosen silence. I won't stop until Charlotte is safe, and until the world knows the truth." Inside Buckingham Palace, the mood was grim. Advisors huddled in tense meetings, their voices hushed but sharp. "We're losing control of the narrative," one senior aide admitted. "Every minute we don't respond, the public fills in the blanks themselves, and it's devastating for Her Majesty." Camilla, for her part, was livid. "She's staging a public crusade," the Queen consort said through gritted teeth. "She's using Charlotte as a shield to make herself look like a martyr. And the press is eating it up." Charles tried to calm her. "The press loves a mother lion," he said quietly. especially one as popular as Catherine. But Camilla wouldn't be soothed. If they release that full footage, she warned, my reputation won't recover. I'll be hounded for the rest of my life. As the palace debated, public opinion continued to shift dramatically. Polls showed a startling 72% of Britons sided with Catherine, agreeing that the footage should be released in the name of transparency. Even among royal loyalists, there was unease about the silence from Buckingham Palace. I've always supported the monarchy, said one woman interviewed on Sky News. But when it comes to children, that's where I draw the line. They need to speak up and clear this mess. The situation worsened when high-profile figures began to chime in. An award-winning children's author tweeted, "If the palace won't protect Charlotte, then Catherine's right to take matters into her own hands. A mother's duty comes first." Even celebrities across the Atlantic weighed in. An American actress posted a cryptic Instagram story saying, "No crown is worth a child's tears." But the most damning comment came from an unexpected source. Prince Harry. In a podcast interview recorded weeks earlier but released that day, Harry spoke of the royal family's habit of sacrificing the vulnerable to protect the powerful. Though he didn't mention the current scandal, listeners immediately connected his words to the firestorm engulfing his niece. "This is what Meghan and I tried to warn everyone about," one royal watcher tweeted, quoting Harry's remarks. As night fell, the pressure on Buckingham Palace reached an unbearable peak. Inside the Queen's private chambers, Camilla paced furiously while Charles sat motionless in an armchair, his face pale. "This is a witch hunt," Camilla said, her voice trembling. "She's turning the world against me. And you're just sitting there." Charles rubbed his forehead. "If we release the footage, it could vindicate you. But if the public sees even a hint of harshness, it will destroy me," Camilla finished for him. And for the first time, she whispered what had been on her mind all along. "Maybe they want me destroyed. Maybe Catherine has been planning this all along." Outside, the winds howled around the palace walls. The monarchy, long regarded as unshakable, was beginning to look fragile. And at the heart of it all stood two women, one fighting to protect her crown, the other fighting to protect her child. The world held its breath, waiting to see who would blink first. The weight of the crown is invisible, but William felt every ounce of it pressing down on his shoulders. For years, he had trained himself to remain calm under pressure, to keep his emotions locked behind the stoic expression that had become second nature to him. But this was different. This wasn't about speeches, public duties, or protocol. This was about his wife, his daughter, and a family crisis spiraling so fast it threatened to pull them all under. In the quiet of Kensington Palace, William sat at his desk, his phone clutched in his hand. He had just ended yet another tense call with his father, and the words still echoed in his mind. "William, you need to control this," Charles had said, his voice tight with barely contained panic. "Talk to Catherine. Make her see reason. She's putting us all in an impossible position." But Charles didn't understand. He didn't understand that Catherine wasn't acting out of spite or anger. She was acting out of love, a fierce, unrelenting love for their daughter. William rubbed his temples, exhaustion radiating through every nerve. For the first time in his life, he wasn't sure which way to turn. Earlier that morning, he and Catherine had argued, softly at first, then with a quiet intensity that left them both drained. "Kate, I'm begging you," he said. "Think about what you're doing. Once this tape is out there, there's no going back. It won't just damage Camilla. It could bring down the whole institution." Catherine stood near the window, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She looked out at the palace gardens, her voice calm but resolute. "The institution has failed Charlotte," she said. "They failed her when they covered this up. They failed her when they chose Camilla over her. And now you're asking me to fail her too." "I'm not asking you to fail her," William insisted. "I'm asking you to trust me. We can handle this quietly. A private apology, stronger protections for the children." "It's too late for that," Catherine interrupted. She turned to him, her eyes glistening. "Don't you see? They would have done the right thing if they cared about her. But they didn't. They cared about protecting Camilla. And if I stay silent now, I'm no better than they are." William didn't know what to say. This wasn't the wife he was used to, the calm, measured woman who always played the long game. This was Catherine as a mother, fierce and immovable. "You're asking me to choose," he said finally. Catherine's expression softened slightly. "I'm asking you to stand with your daughter. But William wasn't sure he could. For decades, the monarchy had thrived on unity. It didn't matter what disagreements raged behind closed doors. In public, they were always a single, unshakable unit. That unity was the foundation of everything. Their popularity, their power, their very survival. And now it was crumbling. In moments of quiet reflection, William found himself caught between two worlds. One was the world of duty and tradition, the world his grandmother had embodied so perfectly. The other was the world of family, love, and the raw, human emotions that came with it. He thought of his mother, Diana, and how often she had spoken of feeling abandoned by the institution she had married into. He thought of Charlotte, her innocent eyes wide with confusion, and the possibility that she might grow up feeling the same way. At Buckingham Palace, Charles and Camilla were growing desperate. William must bring her to heel, Camilla said sharply during a private meeting with senior aides. He's the only one she'll listen to. But Charles wasn't so sure. William is torn, he admitted quietly. And I fear if we push too hard, we'll lose him too. The possibility hung heavy in the air. Losing William's loyalty would be catastrophic. He wasn't just the heir to the throne. He was the future of the monarchy, the one who held public affection in a way Charles never fully had. If Catherine forces his hand, Camilla said darkly, he'll have to choose between her and the crown. But Camilla underestimated the depth of William's love for his wife and children. At Clarence House, advisors floated various strategies for damage control. A carefully staged photo of Camilla and Charlotte together, a joint statement from William and Catherine reassuring the public, even a charitable initiative to shift attention elsewhere. But none of it would work if Catherine wouldn't play along. She's dug in, one aide said grimly. She's not negotiating anymore. That evening, William sat alone in his study, staring at his phone. He scrolled through messages from old friends, journalists, and even former aides, all asking the same thing. What are you going to do? Finally, he called his father. Have you spoken to her again? Charles asked immediately. Yes, William said. And she's not backing down. There was a long silence. Then you must convince her, Charles said quietly. Do whatever it takes. But William wasn't sure he could. For years, he had been the steady hand in the royal family, the one who bridged divides and calmed storms. But this storm was different. This time, there was no easy compromise, no middle ground. He closed his eyes and thought again of Charlotte, her tiny hand slipping into his as they walked to school, her laugh echoing in the garden, her innocent trust in the people around her. And he thought of Catherine, standing tall and unyielding in the face of an institution determined to silence her. That night, William finally understood what was at stake. If he sided with his wife, he risked everything he had been raised to protect. If he sided with the crown, he risked losing the woman he loved and the family they had built together. For the first time in his life, William didn't know which way to turn. But he knew one thing for certain. The next move he made would define not just his future, but the future of the monarchy itself. Far across the Atlantic, in the quiet hills of Montecito, Prince Harry sat in his California home scrolling through news articles on his phone. The headlines flashing across the screen felt almost surreal. Catherine and Camilla at war, palace in crisis. Queen consort accused of bullying Princess Charlotte. Where is William? Harry swiped through the images that accompanied the stories. One photo stopped him cold. It was the leaked screenshot of Camilla leaning toward Charlotte, her hand gripping the child's small arm. Even though it was blurry, even though context was missing, Harry felt his chest tighten. She looks terrified, Meghan said softly behind him. Harry turned. Meghan stood in the doorway, her arms folded across her chest. There was no smugness in her expression, only concern. Do you think it's true? She asked. Harry hesitated. I don't know what happened, but I do know how this family works. If there's a scandal, they'll bury it. They'll protect Camilla at any cost. Meghan stepped closer, her voice quiet but firm. And what about Charlotte? Who's protecting her? It was a question Harry couldn't shake. For years, he had tried to shield his own children from the same pressures and dysfunctions he and William had grown up with. Leaving the monarchy had been his way of breaking the cycle. But now, seeing his niece caught in the machine, he felt a familiar fury rising in him. He picked up his phone and opened his messaging app. For a long moment, his thumb hovered over William's name. The brothers hadn't spoken in months. Their last conversation, after the release of Harry's memoir, had ended in shouting and slammed phones. But this wasn't about them anymore. This was about Charlotte. Finally, Harry typed a message. "Wills, I've seen what's going on. Don't let them silence Kate. Stand up for her. Stand up for Charlotte. You know better than anyone what happens to kids in that family if no one protects them." He hesitated, then hit send. The reply came hours later. "Harry, this isn't your fight. Stay out of it." But Harry couldn't. That evening, he and Meghan recorded a short video for their charity's social media page. It was meant to highlight a new children's initiative, but toward the end, Harry's tone shifted. "Children are our most precious responsibility," he said, his voice carefully measured. "They deserve love, safety, and protection, not just from parents, but from every system and institution around them. When that doesn't happen, it's up to all of us to speak out." He didn't mention Charlotte. He didn't mention the palace. But everyone understood exactly what he meant. The video went viral within hours. Royal watchers and commentators leapt on Harry's words, debating whether he was supporting Catherine in her battle against Camilla. "Harry has thrown down the gauntlet," one news anchor said. "This is no longer just a family dispute. This is a global story." In Buckingham Palace, the reaction was swift and furious. Of course he couldn't resist inserting himself. Camilla snapped. "He sees an opportunity to make this about him and Meghan, to play the heroes again." Charles, however, was more subdued. "Harry is unpredictable," he admitted quietly to an aide, "and he has nothing left to lose." For Catherine, Harry's intervention was unexpected and complicated. On one hand, she was grateful. Someone outside the palace was finally speaking the truth she had been shouting into the void. But on the other hand, Harry's involvement risked making the issue look like a Sussex versus Windsor battle, further polarizing public opinion. "He means well," Catherine said softly to William that night. "But this isn't about him. It's about Charlotte." William's jaw tightened. He hadn't responded to Harry's video publicly, but in private, he seethed. "Harry doesn't get to lecture me about protecting my family," he said. "He abandoned us. He doesn't know what it's like to hold this family together while the world watches." But deep down, William knew his brother wasn't entirely wrong. In the days that followed, Harry's words became a rallying cry for Catherine's supporters. Parenting groups, mental health advocates, and even a handful of MPs began demanding accountability from the palace. "This isn't just about royalty," one activist said during a live interview. "This is about power protecting itself at the expense of a child." Inside the palace, Camilla grew increasingly isolated. Friends. Protests outside Buckingham Palace grew larger. Signs reading "Justice for Charlotte" and "Release the tape" waved in the cold spring air as chants echoed off the palace gates. For Harry, watching from California, the protests brought a bittersweet mix of emotions. "They're fighting for her," he said to Meghan one night as they watched footage on the news. "I just hope it doesn't break them apart the way it broke us." But for William and Catherine, the cracks were already beginning to show. As the pressure mounted, the family teetered on the edge of collapse, and Harry's unexpected intervention had pushed them even closer to the brink. The British press had always thrived on royal drama, but this was different. This wasn't some whispered rumor about a distant cousin's affairs or a photographer catching a senior royal looking slightly bored at an engagement. This was a full-blown crisis with all the elements of a blockbuster scandal. A beloved child, two royal women locked in a silent battle, and a monarchy scrambling to contain the fallout. By the time the morning papers hit the stands, the story was everywhere. "Charlotte caught in palace tug-of-war," screamed the Times. "Is the monarchy protecting the wrong queen?" asked The Guardian. Even tabloid papers like The Sun went for an unusually somber headline. "Our little princess. Britain demands answers." Across breakfast tables and offices, people debated furiously. Talk shows buzzed with commentators analyzing every detail of the leaked screenshot and Harry's cryptic comments. On one channel, a veteran royal reporter insisted the image was being blown out of proportion. Camilla was likely just trying to guide Charlotte during a chaotic rehearsal. Anyone who's raised children knows how easily things can be misinterpreted. But on another channel, a parenting expert shook her head. Guiding a child does not mean grabbing her arm in a way that causes her to flinch. This isn't about royal protocol. This is about basic decency. Internationally, the coverage was even more intense. American networks, ever fascinated by the Windsors, treated the saga like a primetime soap opera. CNN ran a special segment titled Kate versus Camilla, the battle for the future of the monarchy. In Australia, a prominent breakfast show opened with the host saying, "If they think they can sweep this under the rug, they're dead wrong. This isn't 1997. The world won't stand for a child being hurt and silenced." And on social media, the outrage was unrelenting. The hashtags #Justice for Charlotte, #Release the Tape, and #Camilla Must Apologize dominated trending lists in multiple countries. As the storm raged, Buckingham Palace's silence became deafening. "They can't keep ignoring this," said one royal commentator. "Every hour they refuse to respond makes them look more guilty." But behind the gates, the family was paralyzed. "The king wants to wait it out," a senior aide confided to a journalist. "He believes the public will move on if we just stay quiet. But this time, I think he's miscalculated." Charles spent much of his day in private meetings, pacing restlessly as his advisors offered conflicting strategies. "Your Majesty," one said, "we must issue a statement clarifying the context of the footage. If we don't, the narrative will run away from us completely." But another advisor shook his head. "No, any statement will be dissected and torn apart. Better to stay silent and let the noise die down." Camilla, meanwhile, was on the brink. "They're crucifying me out there," she said bitterly to Charles. "Meghan couldn't destroy me, but now Kate has turned the public against me with one blurry screenshot. How is this fair?" Her voice trembled, but her fury was unmistakable. "And you sit there wringing your hands while they drag my name through the mud." Charles tried to soothe her. "You know the truth, darling. That's what matters." But Camilla wasn't convinced. "The truth doesn't matter anymore," she snapped. "Not when Kate has the whole world eating out of her hand." At Kensington Palace, Catherine watched the coverage unfold with a strange mix of relief and dread. "She didn't want this to become a media circus," said a close friend. "But at the same time, she feels vindicated. The public sees what she's been fighting for." William, however, was growing more anxious by the hour. "This isn't just about Camilla anymore," he told Catherine. "It's about the monarchy. If this gets worse, it could destabilize everything." Catherine's response was quiet but firm. "Then let it destabilize. Maybe it needs to." For years, she had been the palace's golden daughter-in-law, the perfect duchess, the smiling princess, the quiet support to her husband. But now, she was something else entirely. A mother prepared to burn the palace down if that's what it took to protect her child. As the hours ticked by, news outlets began reporting on behind-the-scenes leaks from royal staff. According to multiple sources, tensions between the Princess of Wales and the Queen Consort have reached a breaking point, one broadcaster said. Staffers described shouting matches, icy silences, and a family divided down the middle. Even palace employees who had never spoken to the press before began whispering to reporters. "She's not backing down," one said of Catherine. And honestly, good for her. Someone needs to stand up to them. But the most shocking leak came late in the evening when an anonymous source claimed that Catherine had been warned by senior royals to remember her place. The phrase hit the public like a thunderclap. Her place? Her place? One furious tweet read, "Her place is as a mother protecting her daughter. The monarchy should remember their place." By midnight, a protest outside Buckingham Palace had swelled to hundreds of people, holding candles and chanting, "Release the tape. Protect Charlotte. For the royal family.